Hello, my name's Paul Bergin. I'm a moderator of the Mars Hill blog, which you can find at www.paulbergin, that's paulburgin.blogspot.co.uk. I'm currently doing a series of vlogs on the history of significant Arctic and Antarctic expeditions, and the one I want to talk to this evening is about Shackleton's Nimrod Expedition. It was the first expedition he led, his second time he was in Antarctica. First time was on Scott's first expedition, a discovery expedition. And 3 significant things were achieved. The first was the first descent of any significant Antarctic landfall, and that was the ascent of Mount Erebus, a volcano about 13,000 feet high. The South Magnetic Pole was reached by 3 members of Shackleton's expedition in January 1909, and there was an attempt on the South Pole, which failed, but they got to within 97 miles. But what made that significant, the previous one was over 400 miles away from the South Pole. So 6 degrees of latitude were broken in, furthest south record. And there were about 15 on the expedition, a smattering of Australian New Zealanders, but mainly British people. And they immediately had one winter there. They had a hut at Cape Royds, just off the Ross Ice Shelf, similar to where Scott had, not far from where Scott had his discovery expedition. Scott actually made, and this I find abominable, made Shackleton promise not to have his base at McMurdo Sound, where he'd had his discovery expedition. I think it's wrong in those kind of regions to put such limitations. Shackleton had nowhere to go, and he ended up either cancelling the whole expedition or having to land in Scott's place. And you had people like Edward Wilson, who was Scott's right-hand man, who really went for Shackleton for doing that. And what was the alternative? That Shackleton had to lose time, money, everything else, just to satisfy such whims. But Shackleton set up his base at Cape Royds. Just before winter fully set in, there was the ascent of Mount Erebus, and then after winter, there's 3 went to the South Magnetic Pole. Shackleton and 3 others made a bid for the North Pole. Within a couple of months, they got to not only further than Scott, they managed to reach what became known as the Beardmore Glacier. And Shackleton, it looked like a dead end to going in further south, but Shackleton saw a glacier route, and he went for it, which showed incredible detail, tenacity and bravery in the process. And then, but because they ran out of supplies and food, and the chance of them getting back were next to zero if they continued, they pushed as far as they could to the very limits. And in fact, on the last trek south, they literally dumped all their gear and did a long march, to the point where they had to rely on dead reckoning in the last few days, because they were prepared to go as far as they could. But it worked out that all 4 of them had stuck to that they got to about within 100 miles, 88 degrees south, 88.23 degrees south. Any way you look at it, even if they miscalculated, the huge degree of latitude to which they broke that was incredible and could never be surpassed. Such was the furthest north and furthest south records at the time. And they just about managed to get back in time for the relief ship. They had more or less been given up for dead, but they managed to spin out their supplies. It was a bit hairy getting back. They almost faced the same problems Scott did on his second expedition, but weather managed to hold, and it wasn't so cold as it was 3 years later on the barrier of the Ross Ice Shelf. But Shackleton managed to get back in time just before the ship was out in the distance, and and not a single person died on the expedition, which was also unusual. So yes, incredible stuff, and Shackleton got knighted out of it, and well deserved too.